Welcome back to another episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Standridge from San Marcos PD in Texas. This is his 30th year in law enforcement. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, and welcome to everybody, all your listeners, and I hope we have a good podcast.
I'm really looking forward to it. Honestly, when we talked offline, I was really interested in some of your philosophies and some of the things that you're doing organizationally. I've had a lot of conversations with chiefs all across the country, and you introduced me to some new concepts. So I'm really excited to share that with our listeners. I was hoping that we could first start with a little bit of background for anyone who doesn't know who you are. Who are you? How did you get started in law enforcement? And what has your career looked like so far?
Yeah, so um, who am I? I think what probably defines my character most was a bad upbringing. I grew up in stark poverty, and so at a very, very young age, I was strongly influenced by alcoholism in the home. And I'll just make a long story short. Within 30 days of graduating high school, I found myself in the United States military willfully and gladly because I saw the military as the only option to really escape my childhood. And literally started United States Air Force 30 days after graduation. And that really helped frame what I would consider finding Stan, discovering who Stan is. Went overseas 2 years, applied for the Air Force Academy, had to retake my SAT test, do a bunch of physical tests. I actually flew a recruiter overseas and made it through all of those processes. And then the Department of Defense Medical Examination Review Board disqualified me due to an episode of childhood asthma, I think at the age of 13,
Mm.
and the cutoff was 14. So I was denied entry into the Air Force Academy. So I came back stateside, finished my commitment in Texas, and separated from the Air Force, and then landed my first police employment about 18 months later with the Abilene Police Department in Texas. And I spent 26 years there, 11 as their chief. And now I'm the chief in San Marcos, and I've been here this month, November of 2025, exactly 5 years.
Wow. Today, this month,
This month.
5 years. Wow. I appreciate you sharing a little bit about your background. I know that we all have different life experiences. I too came from a really challenging childhood, and it's really admirable for you to say, I wanted to get out of this situation, and you chose something that was healthy. And I did not do that by any means. My escape was unhealthy escapism. And so, I appreciate you sharing, hey, like you don't have to choose the same life that you, or maybe the same cards that you were given, that you have the opportunity to choose a different path for yourself. And sometimes we have to kind of zoom out a little bit and look around and ask ourselves how we want our life to look. And I commend you for looking around and finding something that was really positive. And now here you are, 30 years later, chief of police. I think that's a really incredible story. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, and I want to be sensitive because some of your viewers may still be walking and or living that experience. And so what I would tell them, what I would tell myself at a young 18 years of age is God sometimes does his best work in the wilderness.
Mm.
And so when you find yourself in that wilderness, and you'll know when you're in the wilderness because it is hot, dry, um, there's a lot of duress. When you find yourself in that wilderness, take hold of the fact that it ultimately will be used for your good. It is almost impossible at the moment to believe that. But I can tell you, looking back now on my life, I have seen the evidence of the goodness throughout all of those lean years. So as we walk through that wilderness, recognize that sometimes the best work is done in the wilderness. And at some point, you're going to look back with greater maturity and recognize I am who I am today precisely because I withstood the wilderness.
100%. And I love that you said like it doesn't feel like that in the moment because we can all relate to that. You know, when you're in the hardest times of your life, it's sometimes hard to see the way out. You know, it's hard to see that path and understand that there is something beyond the wilderness, like you said, that there is something greater waiting on the other side. And it's that ability to keep walking forward anyway and keep going, even if you don't see the clearing of the path. And it's such a hard thing. You know, you said kind of looking back on your life, do I wish that feeling or those circumstances on anybody? No. Like I would hope that like, you know, one day everyone could have the best life ever and but it's not the reality of the situation, or at least it wasn't the reality of my situation. And in a lot of ways I'm grateful for those hard times because I don't think I would be who I am today. And I don't think I would have the same passion for wellness and helping others in the way that I do now if I hadn't experienced those really hard, adverse times. And so, yes, I agree. You know, it's like it might not feel like it now, but you know, keep moving forward and one day you'll look back and there might be a little bit of gratitude for the resilience that you were able to foster during that time.
Yeah, gratitude, great word. Love it. Love that emotion. If we all had that emotion of gratitude, then I would submit to you that our nation, our communities would be far more resilient. We would
Mhm.
have more connectedness. It's interesting that we are all seeking to be independent in an interdependent world.
Mm.
We don't need to be independent. We are all truly connected. This human experience is a shared experience. And so if I'm always asked the question, especially if I ever did share my childhood, if you could go back, what would you do different? And to what you just said, I don't know that I would change that adversity because it truly has framed who I am today. But what I would absolutely tell my younger self is find the peace in spite of the circumstances
Mhm.
because it's the invisible that drives the visible. So find that peace irrespective of your circumstances and have that spirit of gratitude. Because when you come out of that wilderness, at some point, you're going to look back on the evidence of your life and realize it was actually for my good. I'm thankful.
Yeah. Do you think that that is the definition of resilience, or do you have a specific definition that you've lived by surrounding resilience?
Yeah, great question. I remember when I was going through graduate school, we discussed this specific question: what is resilience?
Mm.
And I'll never forget it. It was either the instructor or one of my classmates said, well, you know, we typically define resilience as the ability to bounce back. And I'll never forget it because to me, that's a limited definition. The better definition of resilience is the ability to bounce back to a new normal. Because
Mm.
once you've suffered trauma, once you've gone through a critical incident, and oh, by the way, as it relates to policing, research suggests that we're going to go through more than 180 critical incidents in our career. So critical incidents are literally defined by our profession. And so, in light of that, to me, resilience is the ability to bounce back to a new norm because we are forever changed by trauma. How can we cope moving forward, recognizing that things are not the same?
Yeah, wow. I really like that. I like that a lot because you're right. And I would hope that we we don't want to be the same. You know, we're forever changed by every experience, every relationship that we have. But I think there's also this idea that we should be striving for change and growth. And I think that that sometimes is really scary. You know, a lot of people are afraid of change. And so to say, hey, we're going to bounce back to a new normal and you are going to be changed and that's okay. And we're going to also celebrate the growth and the change that you're going to have throughout your life. I like that a lot. One of the definitions I like too is how can you, and this is kind of in the context of emotional regulation, right? Because we want to be able to keep moving forward. And it's this definition of coming back to baseline as quickly as you can, and I always try to live by this idea that, try not to be so high when things are really good, and then try not to be really low when things are bad. How can we kind of regulate and try to get back to a baseline so that we can maintain that forward trajectory? Because you can imagine almost like a graph, or like a peak in a valley. If you're zigzagging up and down, then it's going to prohibit you from moving forward at a quicker speed. It's going to take you longer to get there because of all the ups and downs. So, how can we try to maintain that levelness to keep moving forward? I kind of liked that one too.
Yeah, I like it. And so, early in my career, I used to teach ethics and professionalism. It's actually a specific block of instruction that was required for all basic peace officer academies. And to piggyback on what you just explained, I would use the analogy of a football player. A football player goes to the locker room and does what in anticipation of the game? Well, they go in there and they don all of this protective equipment. And then when they step out on the field, and if they're lucky enough to actually get to play in that game, they step out on the field, and then the other team, somebody runs and hits them,
Mm.
and they fall down and they start whimpering and crying and ask, why did this person just hit me? They're incredulous. That's not how football's played. But that's exactly how many of us live our lives. We know life is difficult. We've heard that platitude to the nth degree. We know it's incredibly difficult. So when life hits us hard, we literally start to go inward and we start to cower and we start to whimper. What do we expect? We absolutely should expect that adversity. Kites rise against the wind, not with the wind.
Mm.
We need to expect that adversity. And so, to your point about establishing that baseline, I encourage everybody to recognize, first of all, if you're on the field of play, consider yourself thankful because you're relevant.
Mm.
Relevant people who are on the field of play, they're going to get hit and they're going to get hit often. If you're not getting hit in life, you're probably on the sidelines and you're not contributing to the game. So establish that baseline. Recognize that peace is not something that's external, it's something that's internal. And in your experience and my experience, it's actually somewhat been harvested through adversity.
Yeah. Wow. I liked the you're relevant and you're in the game instead of on the sideline. I've never heard that before. And I think that a lot of us, excuse me, a lot of us are afraid to fail, or this idea, like you said, of like getting hit, and you don't want to put yourself out there because you're afraid of falling, you're afraid of failure. But it's only through those times that you are growing and you're becoming better. And I tell people this a lot too. Sometimes I think that we forget that resilience and growth isn't just through the adversity, it's also through the successes. And I think we only look at ourselves when we fall down. But how can you also have that same introspection? How can you have that same growth mindset when you are winning? To your point of sports, there's only one team at the end of the season that wins, right? There's one team that's happy. Everyone else is not happy. They all lost. Even if you were in the Super Bowl and you didn't win, you still lost, right? So there's only one team that's happy. But what does that team do? They celebrate. Of course, you want to celebrate your successes and your wins, but they go back and they review tape and they look at themselves and say, "Okay, we did really good. We did the best. We were at an elite level." But where were our quote unquote weaknesses? Where were still those opportunities for growth? Where were those times where maybe we just got a little lucky and next time we won't be so lucky? And so, how can we have that mindset through the failures? I'm going to put that in quote because I think that failures can be successes long term, but through maybe the mistakes or getting hit or falling down, but then also when we're at the top of our game.
Wow. Good wisdom. and I will say that I need to listen and apply what you are saying, but I would also say that I'm not even close to being successful at doing that. Here's what I'll say. This is my lived experience. When I am successful, I'm probably the most concerned and skeptical of my own performance and my hubris and my arrogance and my pride. When I am suffering defeat, I'm probably at my sharpest. So to your point, when I'm at the apex and I'm doing really good, I will be completely candid. Stan is really nervous because that is not where he's used to operating. He's used to operating in the wilderness. So that's my baseline. So I think you're so right. I need to be better at evaluating when I'm truly at that mountaintop. There's a reason that we were given mountains to experience that mountaintop. I just probably need to sit at that mountaintop longer, to your point, versus recognizing, okay, I need to get back where I actually belong, which is down in the valley.
Yeah, interesting. I think we could probably talk on that topic for a while because I can
Sorry.
relate to some of that stuff too, of like the shoe dropping and, kind of that
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
uncomfortability. I really want to talk a little bit about wellness and the things that you're doing organizationally, but I'm curious, we talked about the definition of resiliency and what that means. Where does wellness play into this, and what do you think maybe defines wellness within law enforcement?
So number one, I applaud my chosen profession because I think so many more people are talking about wellness than ever before. I know, like you said earlier, I'm in my 30th year of law enforcement. I don't remember discussing wellness whatsoever. Now there's extensive conversation. So I'll give you a story to illustrate what I'm about to provide. 10 years ago, the Texas Police Chiefs Association approached me. I was the chief of Abilene, Texas. And they said, hey, we want you to chair the Officer Safety Committee. I said, great. I didn't even know that existed. What is it? Mm-hmm. And they told me, well, it's a committee of which you would chair and you would have committee members and you would get data from the Texas Municipal League risk pool. And you would evaluate the data to figure out how we're getting injured and even killed. And I said, oh, not it. I'm not a statistician. I have zero desire to go through data. I said, I'm more of a kinetic chief. I want to do things. I want to be very active. And they said, hang on. It would be your committee. You could make it what you want. So to your point, they said, are you willing to do it? I said, if I get to create it, yes. So I call my team together. There were probably maybe 8 or 10 of us in the room. And I asked that very question. Team, how do we increase wellness in law enforcement? How do we make ourselves harder to injure? How do we make ourselves harder to kill? How do we ensure wellness and resiliency? One of my dear friends, his name is Mike, immediately said, oh, the word that comes to mind is vincible. Somebody immediately corrected him. Oh, you mean invincible? And Mike said, that's exactly the problem. Law enforcement thinks they are invincible. So the problem with considering ourselves invincible, which we're actually taught in the police academy, we are told that you must go home at the end of the shift. So you've got to be invincible. The problem is we are contributing to our own injuries and deaths more than 50% of the time. Wow. So that's where we started to really tackle this problem in the state of Texas, because Texas leads the nation. It's either number 1 or 2 across all 50 states for line of duty deaths in the nation. We're first place for all the wrong reasons. And I was not okay with that 10 years ago, and I'm still not okay with it today. So we began to ask that hard question. What is wellness in law enforcement? And for us, it's not just emotional, it's not just spiritual, it's not just financial. For us, we asked, what cornerstones, what pillars would truly help move the needle as it relates to keeping officers safer from injury and death? And we actually came up with 5 pillars. First and foremost, we're going to stay fit. There's a direct correlation between fitness and our profession, regardless of how much our profession wants to push back. Our profession, of all people, pushes back. But fit officers use less force. Fit officers use force less often.
Mm.
It's true. The data proves it. We got to stay fit. We have to wear our body armor in field operations. It's hot. It's uncomfortable. I'm in Texas. I think you're in Arizona. It's incredibly hot. Body armor is like wearing a quilt outside in 100-degree weather. But if you're engaged in field operations, your department should have a mandatory policy that requires body armor. Third thing, a lot of cops think there's an exception in transportation code that says I don't have to wear a seatbelt. I'm an emergency responder. Well, if we're going to be well, if we're going to promote wellness within our profession, then we have to recognize, number one, there's not a carve out in law as it relates to seatbelts and emergency responders. We shall wear our seatbelts. It probably would shock the nation to read, and you can actually read all line of duty deaths by going to odmp.org, Officer Down Memorial Page.org, ODMP, and you can read how every officer is killed in the line of duty. Pay attention to how often seatbelts play a role. We've got to seatbelt ourselves. And then we have to slow down. We are out driving our abilities. No call warrants a response or a driving response that's going to get you killed or kill somebody else. We are driving in triple digit speeds to get to a fight in progress. When culturally we know that fight is going to be long over before we arrive. Or we're going to a shoplifter in custody and we're going code 3 and we're doing 30 miles in excess of the posted speed limit. Those behaviors have to stop. Those behaviors are killing us and it's killing our citizens. So we are going to slow down. And then the final one is perhaps the more comprehensive one. And I actually stole this from a national program called ALERT. ALERT is Advanced Law Enforcement Rapid Response Training. It's actually based at Texas State, which is in San Marcos, Texas. And we use this concept of 540, 540 degrees. And the reason being is when an officer enters an environment, they are forced to fight in a 360-degree environment, plus whatever is above. So then the concept is you fight in 360 environment plus whatever is above, that's 180 degrees. 180 plus 360 is 540. So the 540 concept is an officer, I love Big Bang Theory, crazy as it sounds, but I love that show. And at the beginning of that show where it shows the atom and you got the nucleus and you got all these electrons flying, that's us. We've got to be operating in that 540-degree environment. So what does that look like for us? Our 540 in the state of Texas says on one side of the coin, we're going to practice emotional, mental, spiritual, financial fitness. On the opposite side of the coin will be tactical competency. We actually have to be competent as Texas peace officers. So to answer your question and make a long story, a long response, we're going to implement those five pillars, those 5 cornerstones, so that we can be well in the state of Texas.
I love that. I actually have never heard, of course, I've heard like mental, emotional, physical, but for you to break it down based on data is really interesting. And we know that all of you guys are really into numbers, like for the most part, right? Like it's a numbers driven profession and we're looking at ROI and all this stuff. But for you to take a look and say, okay, how and why are people dying or becoming injured? What are those top reasons? And then let's work backwards. Let's figure out what we can do as a solution to those things. And I talk about this all the time. I really think that there's 3 steps to forward movement or growth. One is awareness. You know, you have to have awareness around the challenge or around the problem or the room for improvement. Without awareness, you don't know what you don't know. The second one is education. So, what are those resources and things that can be done to counteract or to improve upon those things? The last one is going to be implementation or action. There's
Mhm.
no sense in having awareness and education if you're not doing anything about it. So, what is that like actionable, implementable thing that you can do so that you can start to see change? What I find to be really interesting is that it seems like Texas in general, you guys all really talk to each other a lot. You communicate with each other, and it feels more unique than other agencies in other states. And it seems to me like there's a lot of silos. Everyone's kind of operating independently. Do you feel like everything that you just said, that information, those numbers, and is that common knowledge? And if so, how do you get that out there where you guys are all on the same page and understand this? And if not, how do you make that more common knowledge so everyone understands this and can move into that action phase?
Yeah, I so wish we had talked 10 years ago. Um, because you went right to the heart of the matter. You can have an aspirational goal, but how do you actually implement, especially with something as large as the state of Texas?
Right.
And so we had to contemplate the exact same issue.
Mm.
First of all, whatever you do has to be repetitive. It has to be topical, meaning it has to be relevant. And I regrettably have to say it needs to be free and it needs to be delivered to your doorstep because we're all super busy. And
Mm.
I can say that with sincerity. Texas police agencies are incredibly busy. So we need to provide it to their doorstep. So a lot of things we do, we seek to invade police culture. When I say Yeti, you know exactly what product I'm thinking of. When I say Coca-Cola, you know exactly what product I'm thinking of. When I say Vincible, I need every Texas peace officer to know exactly what product I'm talking about. As soon as they hear Vincible, they have to associate with Vincible with, oh, I am Vincible. I do contribute over half the time to my own demise. I need name recognition across the state of Texas. I would love to tell you we're there,
Mm.
but it's a journey, not a destination. All right. So, how do we do that? We deliver weekly roll calls. So, it's a very brief PowerPoint, usually 6 slides. The Officer Safety Committee will initiate the topic for the week. It usually comes from me or a couple people on my committee. And then we do the slide deck, and then we kick it out to the greater committee, which has medical physicians, it has a couple of attorneys, it has a couple of tactics gurus, and the rest are Texas police chiefs. And we vet it internally. Once we're good with it, then by Friday, we use a members listserv, and then it goes out all across Texas into their inbox. All they have to do is open an email and share it with their department.
Mm.
Totally free. Invade culture. My goal is for every Texas peace officer, I don't care who you work for, if you're the state, if you're local, or your county, when you report to work, before you go out on the streets to provide services to the citizens, you do at least a 15-minute touch point. And this is you talked earlier when we first started. Our profession is very guilty of what's called checkbox training. So, as an example, I'm a police chief. If I send an officer to a class, in a year from now, I expect that officer still remember what he or she learned. That's not the case. Data shows what's called skill decay. They will lose that skill set. By the way, you don't lose it gradually. The data actually shows, and by the way, they use CPR recertification to actually test this. You lose the majority of what you learned in that training class within 38 days. It's almost like we should have gone.
Yep.
By the end of the year, you've lost 92% of everything you taught. That is what I call checkbox training. I want to move the needle. I want to get to what's called professional development. Training is an event, development is a process.
Mm.
I want to invade Texas police agencies on a weekly basis with recurring, relevant, topical issues that are contributing to safer Texas peace officers. And by literally doing it every week. And by the way, we also do things like stickers. We have shirts. We have hats. Every one of them have Vincible, Vincible, Vincible. When they open their mobile data computer, I want a sticker on there that says you are Vincible. And these are the 5 cornerstones. I want to so pervasively invade culture that we reinforce this notion. We can save ourselves over half the time by doing some intentional best practices.
Wow.
We're getting there. We're not there yet.
I had a mentor when I was kind of coming up in my career, and they looked at me and they said there is a big difference between recalling and knowing. And I think that a lot of us, it's to your point, maybe you took a training and you're sitting there a year later and you're trying to recall what you learned. You don't actually know it, right? It's not like in your bones. You don't know it. You're trying to recall it. And there's a big difference between knowing and recalling. And so to your point, how do you know these things? How do you remember these things? And I agree with you. And I'm nerding out on all like the data points because I'm also a big numbers nerd. But I'm not calling you a nerd. I'm a nerd. But there is a lot of research that I've done in that very topic of you know a single training versus an ongoing, consistent initiative. And there is so much data to support that the ongoing consistency and that reinforcement is far more valuable and successful for people actually absorbing and retaining that information.
Let's use the analogy of a marriage. I can literally be married to my spouse and I could see her once a year. I probably would know a lot about her academically, but unless I see her on a daily basis, there is no true knowledge.
Mm.
And the exact same is true for anything that we touch. And so, to your point, we have got to invade culture. We have got to make this thing recurring to the point. And by the way, one of the greatest books I read in 2023 is a book called The Influencer. And its premise is really simple. How do you actually influence people? We think we know the answers, but it's actually not intuitive. One of the principal ways to influence people is to ask them open-ended questions. So
Mm.
the way Vincible is organized is on the slide one is just an introduction. Slide two is it gives you the scenario. And then in briefing, it's a sergeant or a lieutenant or a commander. They facilitate this. They ask open-ended questions because we're not looking for people who can do a knowledge check. We're looking for a person who actually can teach it back.
Hmm.
I would submit to you, you really know material when you actually teach it back. And
Yeah.
so that's the way we're trying to do it internally to the state of Texas. That's harder said than, or correction, harder done than said. So
Yeah. To your point, and this is not exactly the same topic, but I think similar in the sense of I've had this question a lot recently, where a lot of people will ask me, how do you get people to do something that they don't want to do? And I don't think I ever give the answer that maybe people are looking for. I think they're looking for me to be like, do this, but I have found so much more success in the open-ended questions to ask people, why is it important for you to do it? And I'm going to put this in the context of wellness, right? So if I walked into a briefing room and I was like, you should do this because I think it's important for you to do this. As an outsider coming in, I'm sure you as the chief have way more success in that realm of telling people what to do than I do. But, I find a lot of people will look at me and be like, who's this person? Or like, there's that defensiveness a little bit. And so I always try to ask people, well, why is it important for you? Because it looks different for everybody. And I think that once there's that intrinsic value and that like internal connection to what we're doing, that's where the buy-in comes in. That's where the action comes in. Like that's where you get them to drink. You say like, oh, we can lead a horse to water, but we can't get them to drink. It's like, no, maybe you can't force them to do that. But if they decide that it's important for them to do that, then they're far more likely to take that action. And so I always ask that open-ended question too of, well, why is it important to you? Is it your family? Is it your kids? Is it your team? Is it the community? Why is it important for you? And then that's the reason to take that next step and take that action.
I love it. The second thing the book espouses, and so this I really love this one too, is the use of story.
Mm.
Story sells, and we all actually know that intuitively. But can you imagine going into that same briefing, asking open-ended questions? And so even I try to do this even as the chief. Instead of me saying you need to do this for these reasons, I try to connect it to story. And so the book gives an example. There's a trucking company. They've had a lot of fleet crashes. And then they had some complaints that their fleet was driving too fast through neighborhood streets. So they're going to call all the managers together. And if they're like a normal company, somebody's going to get in front of that group of management, like a chief, and they're going to say, it's going to stop. You're going to tell your drivers to slow down. We're not going to tolerate this, and we're going to fire people if we don't do otherwise. That plays out in corporate America every day. It plays out in policing every day. It does not motivate change.
Mhm.
What motivates change? They actually cite this example. They came in and they said, hey, can anybody think of a story where you were personally impacted by somebody driving too fast through a neighborhood? They then leave, they give them a while, they come back after they have time to noodle it, ask for persons who would speak up. One person stood up and shared his story. He says, I was young. I think the ages in the book were like 5 to 7 years of age.
Mhm.
And there were several of them playing out in the street. I should have been. And he remembers to that day where a vehicle was going too fast and struck and killed one of his best friends in his neighborhood. The book then goes on to say that story changed the outcome. So,
100%.
storytelling, open ended question, don't attribute to somebody the reason they're doing or not doing something. So, that's a hard thing to do. So, good luck as you and I continue to navigate that.
100%. I like that a lot because as you're saying that, I felt that internally, and I might not have that same shared experience that somebody else has, but I could imagine the heartbreak and the devastation of that enough to influence me to not ever want to do that. And so I think that there's so much power in us sharing our stories. And sometimes, like you said, it's hard. People, you've been in briefings, it's hard to get anyone to raise their hand and share something like that, but I think the more we have conversations like this and the more, leadership displays that it's okay to share our shared experiences and that's what's going to move the ship forward in a positive direction. I think we will start to see that change over time. And I think we have. I think, we've seen a forward trajectory with wellness, even in the last, you know, 5 years,
Yeah,
I would say
I
5 to 8
definitely agree.
years. Yeah. How do you think, and this is kind of my final little bit before, we wrap for the day, but how do you think that professional development plays into wellness, plays into retention, longevity in the career? And you also mentioned something to me that I was hoping that you could kind of touch on is professional legitimacy as well and what that means.
Yeah. So, to me, professional development is the antidote for checkbox training. Remember, training is an event, development is a process.
Mhm.
To actually do professional development, I think we have to have a couple of things in law enforcement. First and foremost, we need to increase scenario-based training. The idea of academic lectures changing behavior is proven over and over through the data to be ineffective. We have got to increase scenario-based training. That's costly. It also induces injuries during training, but it's absolutely data proven to be empirically superior to anything else. So, as it relates to professional development, we need to empty the seats and actually go outside and actually get dirty, so to speak, going through scenario after scenario after scenario. As a profession, I think also a huge piece of professional development is the use of after action reports. To your point earlier in the conversation, we need to evaluate the good, the bad, and the indifferent in so many of our responses. Just this week alone in San Marcos, Texas, we had 3 shootings in one night, literally within about 5 hours, which resulted in 4 people being shot and 1 being killed. We've got to take our profession to the point where we look at our collective response as a department, arguably as a city, and we need to actually start to evaluate that effectiveness and start asking really, really hard questions. Otherwise, to your point earlier, you could be on the mountaintop and not learn anything. You could be in the valley and still not learn anything. Until you take the intentional time to actually unpack everything that was learned from the mountaintop or the valley, nothing is actually learned.
Yeah.
So to me, professional development is truly the antidote. We need to do more of that. It needs to be scenario driven and needs to be after action based report.
Yeah.
Professional legitimacy is, to me, it's a little bit of a different hat. Um, to me, this is about community connectedness. And what I tell people all the time is legitimacy is not inferred, it's conferred. What does
Mm.
that mean? We don't assume we have legitimacy. We don't assume professional legitimacy just because I have a badge and I have a gun. That does not make me legitimate. Our citizens decide if we're legitimate. They confer that upon us. And the only way they're going to do that is through mutual trust and respect. And so when I talk about professional legitimacy, that's what I'm referring to. It's not something that we infer, it has to be conferred upon us.
Yeah. And do you feel like having that community support and then also having that bar that is raised for development, that helps to prevent burnout and keep people moving in this career?
Yes, exclamation point. This, let's be candid, this is a very difficult profession.
Yeah.
I am so thankful that men and women still choose this profession. I would submit to you that it's an incredibly noble profession. I'll give you proof, I'll give you evidence. People tell me all the time, hey, we're tired of reading media stories or seeing TV stories about police misconduct. And I tell them the insane, be thankful. They're like, why should I be thankful for police misconduct? No, no. Be thankful that the media is still covering it. Because the day that it's so commonplace that it's no longer newsworthy, that's the day I'm hanging it up.
Mm.
But right now, police misconduct is still so rare that it captures the national narrative for all the right reasons. Our profession needs to be rooted in apology. I'll say that again. To all my peers out there, our profession needs to be rooted in apology. If you look back historically and even contemporarily, we have done things that have harmed, we have done things that have been criminal. We must be rooted in apology if we truly want to be community focused.
Wow.
All right, I'll get off my soapbox. That's a whole different.
Yeah, but I really, the one thing that I really appreciated is that there are always different ways to look at a situation. And for you to say, yeah, it's good that we're in the media because it's so rare that now it's making news. People don't normally think that way, right? And I think that we get so stuck in our one track way of thinking to understand there are other ways to think about this. There are other ways to have gratitude, a positive mental attitude, to look at things from different perspectives. And so I really appreciate that you said that. And I've never had anyone say what you just said on this podcast. So thank you. My final question for you is for the younger generation. What words of wisdom would you share with someone who's earlier in their career? You know, maybe something that you wish you would have known earlier or something that's helped you along the way.
I'll go even further. I'll say my advice to the person who is just beginning law enforcement, write it down. I so wish I had written things down over a 30-year career. Because remember, stories influence. If I had chronicled my lived experiences over the last 30 years, I could write probably dozens of books, but I didn't. And I lament that. So it's really simple. Write it down. Keep your first paycheck. You're going to look back at 30 years and think, how in the world did I even afford to drink water on that paycheck? Keep your first paycheck. Write down your first arrest. Write it down. Know everything you did on that first arrest. Write down your first citizen commendation. Accentuate the positive because there's not a chance you're going to remember this. Now, everybody thinks in the contemporary, the here and now, I'm going to remember this for the rest of my life. No, you're not. Your life is lived, and it's normally lived looking forward, not through the rearview mirror.
Mm.
So please, my encouragement to you is write it down. You're going to live a rich life. Wouldn't it be nice to share that with somebody?
Wow. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your insights, your perspectives, and all the things that you're doing. So thank you.
And thank you what you are doing for our chosen profession.
Of course.